Enjoy this Wild Soul Gathering production. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie. Pour yourself a really tall glass of spiritual curiosity and join me for the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. In the spirit of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life. Today in the studio, we have Dr. Don St. John. He is a psychologist, a teacher, and author, and he's immersed himself in the psychological, somatic, relational, and the spiritual worlds for more than 50 years. Welcome to the show, Dr. John.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here, Sandra. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I was going to say this morning, but I know it's not morning where you are.
That's right. It's all those different time zones. It's interesting keeping track of everything. And what's really interesting is the show has really taken on a life even more than I could have expected. So we do have a pretty global audience. So the time is all over the place for people.
Okay.
Don,
Yeah.
You're such a wealth of information and you have so many experiences. But today I would like to narrow it down and really focus on two different topics: the loneliness epidemic and the role of ayahuasca in spiritual development.
Okay.
They're both, I think, really relevant and important topics. And in some way, I'm having this weird feeling that they're going to intermesh for us. They may not, but they'll both be good topics.
Yeah, I think they will.
Yeah, I'm thinking so also. So, Don, let's start with the loneliness epidemic. Back in 2022-23, the Met-Gallup did a survey that was taken across the globe. So it included 142 different countries. And they found that 24% of the people 15 and older reported feeling very or fairly lonely, with, interestingly enough, the highest reported group was young adults at 19 to 29, and they were at 27%. The other thing that was interesting is a lot of times folks feel it's the more elderly or aging. I'm not sure that I'm a fan of elderly or aging since I'm in that group at this point in my life, and I don't feel like either actually represents me with the label. But what's interesting is they actually self-reported the lowest, although a lot of our initiatives are geared towards that population and loneliness. So there seemed to be a disconnect with that when I was looking at the data. The other thing that's interesting is the World Health Organization has declared loneliness a global public health concern. So what are your thoughts and insights on this epidemic?
Well, my first thought, Sandra, is that it's about time that they have declared it a health issue, a health risk, because I think it definitely is and has been, but not recognized as such. Loneliness, for example, kind of depletes the immune system. And right there, just that much tells us, that it's not good for our health.
Just to add on to that real quick, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
But I was really surprised at the statistics on this. 32% increase in strokes, 50% increase in developing dementia, which I thought was really significant. And there was a big increase in heart disease, but the biggest risk, which sort of makes sense depending where you go with the loneliness and how deep it goes, lessens your life expectancy significantly.
Yes. And, there's so many ways that we can enter this conversation. The first thought that comes to my mind is that, all the blood in our body that goes everywhere in our body goes through our heart. And if the energy of our heart is one of depletion or despair, loneliness, okay, that quality of energy is being circulated throughout the body.
Wow.
We need connection. We need it from the moment we're born, right? A baby cannot survive without connection. It's an essential nutrient. And Sandra, I think the problem is that humankind hasn't yet evolved beyond the level of, me, mine, my success, my accumulation of things, my achievements. When we take a closer look, it's pretty obvious that, so much of our satisfaction or dissatisfaction in our lives comes from our relationships. If we have a good marriage and a tough job, compare it to an easy flowing job and a bad marriage.
Point.
And see, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't realized, and our institutions, our educational institutions, our values don't take into account the fact that achieving intimacy, real intimacy, and the capacity for heartfelt connections is critically important to the quality of our lives, especially once we, have a dwelling, a place to live, and enough food to eat. We need connections. And so until we realize that and start changing, the media, the news, our educational systems, it's simply not fully recognized yet. Maybe it's starting compared to when I was a kid, but wow, we got a ways to go.
Well, I would agree with that. It looks differently than when we were kids, but also when we were kids, the landscape looked a lot different, right?
Yeah.
We didn't have social media, and the social media, which is, I think, playing a huge role in this loneliness epidemic, and the other being just what you said about the TV, that it seems to be my mantra of 2024 is just turn the TV off. What we're seeing and what is in the media and the media is consumed with creates a lot of intense fear, which almost just has people locking themselves in their homes because they're afraid to come out or they're afraid to interact. We've created a fear that also interferes with that. Your thoughts on the social media and just that shift with how interactions really are these days?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you that social media is a huge factor in the loneliness epidemic. We believe we're connecting by texting someone and, getting a response. And on one hand, there's something to be said for it. For example, I'm in touch with people that I've known for years and years that I otherwise would not be in touch with at all. And once in a while, we exchange a sentence on social media. However, I have an ample quantity of connections where it's face to face. And I think there was fear back when we were kids. I grew up in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, and we had the nuclear bomb. We used to have drills where we'd get under the desk to protect ourselves from a hydrogen bomb, which is it's ludicrous that getting under a desk is going to do anything but make you frightened. The Russians are coming with bombs. But now, we get it from so many different channels. Now, there's so many cartoons. I just saw one yesterday where about 10 girls sitting on a bench in a museum surrounded by beautiful art, and they're all head down looking at their phones. That kind of phenomenon is certainly a contributor to this epidemic of loneliness. But it goes deeper, I think, Sandra. I think it goes much deeper. See, as I said in my opening sentence, there's so many angles to approach this. The body is a relational organ. We don't realize that. We don't tune that instrument to relate. You know, we might buff it up at the gym. We might stay fit and run and exercise. But it's also, if it's shut down, it's harder to connect with another human being. Again, many different ways to enter this conversation.
That's very interesting. And I will agree, when I lived internationally is really when I got into social media more, because it was a nice way to stay connected with people stateside. Not the same as being with people personally, but it definitely makes a difference. And I agree, a lot of times you're out and you see people out to dinner and everyone's texting. And,
Mm,
when you travel, a lot of times you're seeing that disconnection. So when we talk about that, there's that loneliness and being alone, and they're really very different things. Many people report, and I think that it's the other side of the social media, where people are out in social situations, they're in groups, they're making themselves available, but yet they still feel disconnected, or they're not able to connect. There's still that intense loneliness. I just had a conversation about this earlier this week with a good friend of mine, and we're doing a lot of intense spiritual work. And we were talking about how we both sort of had self secluded. I'm sort of up on this farm in the middle of nowhere, and
mm,
she's doing some other stuff in another state by the lake. But it's a choice, and we don't
mhm.
feel alone with it. It's an intentional process to go within and do some work. That's like three different scenarios that I've thrown out there with you to create just a little bit of differentiation on how that works. How could we provide some information to help people understand it more internally, and then to help give them possible solutions to address it? Because right now, a lot of the solutions people are choosing are substances and to leave the planet, and that's really concerning.
Yeah, that's very concerning. I talk about the healing journey, and you can look at that from a spiritual perspective or psychological perspective. Uh, yeah, when I was young, let's say throughout my 20s into my very early 30s, I could be with 50 people all day long and still feel lonely because I couldn't connect. I couldn't open myself, my heart, sufficiently to feel the other person's presence with me. And I'll tell you, Sandra, the first time I felt it, it nearly knocked me over because it was so palpable. It was so real. It's like, whoa, what is this? Yeah, it's called connection.
What you said is just so important. There are so many people out there who are like,
Yeah,
yes, me too.
yeah. And we have to learn how to open ourselves up, how to reveal ourselves, how to pay attention, how to be quiet and listen to ourselves, to know ourselves beneath the outer garments. We all wear outer garments. You could call them subpersonalities, you could call them identities, you can name them different ways, but they're kind of, and we need them to navigate in the world. But from time to time, it's important that we be able to take them off and say, here I am. Here I am unadorned. Here I am. My heart's available to you. And when we can do that, as we learn to do that, we have these sweet moments more and more frequently. I love it when my wife leaves for 3 days or so. She goes on a short trip somewhere, and the solitude is precious. I don't feel lonely in that time. I experience solitude. a time to be even more quiet with myself, a time to listen to myself, a time just to be a little bit freer. But we're capable to have deep connection. And it makes all the difference in the world. And I think we all long for it. There's a beautiful book called Love 2.0, and I don't remember the author's name at the moment. She was a research psychologist at the University of North Carolina, and she talked about these love moments when you might be on a bus talking to a stranger in a long bus ride, and you start to open up. You start to talk about something that's really important to you that you typically don't talk about. And you feel this kind of love, this moment, this warmth. And those are important.
Those are the moments that are so unexpected but leave you with a smile inside.
Yes, exactly.
When we talk about integrating spirituality to help address the loneliness epidemic, I think you just touched on one of the things that is relevant is removing the mask, because we all have masks and we have many masks. First, you have to recognize that you have the mask and what it is, and a little bit about it, and then taking it off.
Yes, and that's a process in and of itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, definitely part of the growth experience. And the other that you talked about is valuing that time alone and using it in a way that's going to benefit you, with the going within and the focusing on who am I? Like I'm part of something that's big. I'm part of spirit. We have a lot of value in recognizing that.
Hmm.
What would be some of the next steps that you would talk about, or some other kinds of things people can embrace? And just A, first recognizing things, and B, some possible solutions that they could start with, small steps.
Small steps would be taking small risks. You see someone, you're at a party, you're at a community event, and you see someone, and they spark an interest. Take the risk. Say hello. You know, reach out to people that that may not be close friends, but they're in that maybe tertiary circle of friends, acquaintances. Take small risks. And I want to drop that as a seed because someone did that to me some 50 plus years ago. And there was an event that I kind of wanted to go to, but it was so much trouble to drive on the freeway and all that voice said, take the risk, go do it. I did. It changed the direction of my life, just the people I met and what happened subsequent to that. Take small risks. Reveal yourself. Share how you feel about something or other. Work to not judge and criticize yourself harshly. If you need to get help with that, do, because we get in our own way so often. We're so afraid of how we look or how we come across or what that other person is going to think, or certainly they're going to reject us. All of that gets in the way of say, this is how I feel about this. This is who I am. So those are some of the little things that one can initially do. The overarching thing is to recognize that this journey of psychosomatic, spiritual, relational evolution is why I think we're on the earth.
100%.
And if you agree with that, then you're setting an intention in the universe, and you're going to begin seeing things that could be supportive of that journey. And then you make choices. Again, go back to take the risk, try it out.
Those are two really important ones, and you touch on the importance of addressing one's self talk.
Oh, big time.
I think that we all do it. I know that self talk is a massive issue, with me personally. And the more that I'm aware of my self talk and I can have self talk with myself about my self talk, really it helps and it makes a difference. And sometimes you're right, you need to engage someone else with it. The other part of that formula, I would say, is letting go of any expected outcome. When you take those small risks and you put yourself out there, you can't, I think you have to be careful not to be attached to an outcome. I reached out, oh my God, they didn't speak to me or whatever. That's theirs to own. It's not necessarily yours to own. And in our self talk, we start making assumptions that it reflect back on ourselves. And then that goes back to the four agreements. Don't make any assumptions with it. These simple things that we can do that take a lot of courage. There's a lot of courage in being authentic. Taking that chance is important.
Absolutely. Let me give you another slant. I think what you just said, Sandra, is so important because we can cripple ourselves with that self talk. And, that inner critic can be ferocious sometimes. And what I've discovered, and I'm working in different ways with people to help them get this, we have to own our own ferociousness. We have to be able to somatically feel. Listen, what animal can be more destructive than the human animal?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the destruction my puppy just did, and I was like, well, but you're right, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
None, really, none. I mean, compare that to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Iraq, and if we can embrace our own ferociousness and match that voice when it starts talking, when it starts like attempting to annihilate us sometimes. Like, who's going to want to love somebody like you? Or who's going to care for anyone who looks like, that kind of crippling internal dialogue? If we can feel within us that force that can say, wait, stop, let's not go there, with equal strength, we could get into a dialogue that could be constructive.
Yep.
But if we, if one of our masks is I'm a meek and gentle person, I could never, right? Then we're actually what we're doing is we're projecting that force, we're giving it to the inner critic, and it turns against us. It comes against us instead of for.
Wow, that's a interesting observation.
Yeah, instead of for us, that viciousness comes at us.
That's definitely an aha statement. I appreciate you. Thank you for saying that. Other ways that speaks to you with spirituality, integrating it from a spiritual perspective. You mentioned, ourselves as self-creators because we create both sides, right? And manifestation and helping to move that loneliness along because it's all going to be a process.
Mm-hmm. I think we talk about purifying spiritually. For me, one of the most important things that we need to purify are beliefs, deep core beliefs that were formulated before we were 4 or 5 years old that don't serve us in our lives at this time. Believe.
And those beliefs weren't even ours to start with.
Well, for example, yeah, I almost died at birth. My mother told me the cord was wrapped around my neck. My whole body was black. The obstetrician performed the miracle. I lived. Well, right there, very easy to inculcate the belief the world is quite dangerous, quite dangerous. And then, my mother started swinging at me while I was still, before I was a year old, took some hard slaps at 11, 12 months old.
Wow.
Yeah, reinforces the world is dangerous. You better get somewhere safe. So I went up into my head and lived there because it was the safest place to be. So that belief has to be dealt with. Otherwise, I'm forever walking around looking for where the next blow is going to come from. Or if I get really close to somebody, the way an infant does with mother, she's going to suffocate me or hurt me. And so better not get close here, right? Those kinds of beliefs.
Okay.
And so that's one of the processes, and also language. How I talk about my experiences, how I talk about other people. That's a big part of how I create my reality. If I go around saying everything is terrible, look at the world, it sucks, look at what's going on here, there, and that's all I see, more and more, that's what I'm living in. So beliefs and language, to really pay attention to, our lives, to look for where our beliefs aren't supporting us and where we're using language that isn't supporting us.
Wow, that's important. And you brought up the purification, and I think that's a good segue into our ayahuasca conversation.
Mm.
But I do want to say, just because you just broached on this, you do have a book that you wrote that is pretty powerful called Healing the Wounds of Children and Culture, an Adventure of a Lifetime. So I did want to put that out there. You just gave us a little brief snapshot of.
Can I show it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, an Adventure of a Lifetime. And I also talk about in the book my experience with ayahuasca. So
Okay, well let's switch over to that, especially when we're talking about purification, the spirituality. I think this is a nice segue. So please share.
okay, well, it began for me back in 1968. I was in my second year of graduate school at the University of Kansas, clinical psychology. For the first time, I tried a psychedelic. At the time, I considered myself an atheist, a recovering Catholic. I was pretty rational, empirical, and that was it. When I did LSD for the first time, it shifted me profoundly, realizing that there was a whole lot more than I thought. That was the first step. And so, it opened me to the possibilities. And I didn't do a whole lot of psychedelics, but, a couple times a year. Then in 1994, I heard about this group of Brazilians that come to Seattle and share this substance called ayahuasca. Very eager to try it, and I did. And that was, I guess, 29, going on 30 years. This coming October will be 30 years that I've been a member of this church whose sacrament is ayahuasca. In the church, we call it Owaska. It's the same thing. Yeah, it's been a big part of my life, big part of my family. My wife and I have been doing it together now for going on 30 years.
Well, ayahuasca's been around for a millennium.
What?
The natives, the shamans.
Yes.
I've always been really attracted to the Amazon ever since I've been a kid, and I was gifted to spend 4 days in the Amazon
Hmm.
in Ecuador, and then I was in Brazil, just touched a little bit about it. And their ceremonies that they do, the shamanic ceremonies, which use a lot of ayahuasca, a lot of different, rape, different other herbals from the jungles. It just amazed me how they could use so
Hmm.
many different things in their environment as part of their everyday items that they use for self-care, and that it's something that I've been drawn to for a really long time. In the United States, it's illegal. It's interesting the countries that it's legal and not legal in. Obviously, Ecuador and your Brazil, your more South American countries, it's not an issue. But in the U.S., it's illegal except in places like Seattle, Detroit, Texas. There's like a list of, I want to say, 10 different areas where they've actually voted to legalize it, and they're using it for healing. And I know that, like you discussed, it's a sacrament in that particular church. I've read about that, but it's even becoming more mainstream in that it's being recognized for its healing properties, not only with depression, but in other areas. The other thing that really strikes me is it's used a lot in spiritual growth and connection, and the different experiences people have had to realize that we are part of something bigger,
Hmm.
and it increases the knowing. So just some insights on that.
Yeah, and before I respond to that specifically, Sandra, I want to talk about the legal thing. I don't know about local laws and such, but in 2006, in February 2006, the United States Supreme Court handed down a unanimous decision allowing our church the use of the sacrament in the entire United States. If it's, from our church, it is completely legal in the laws of the land of the U.S. That was, it was quite a process. It was a 5.5 year process through 4 different courts over all that time. We won in all 4 courts, culminating in the Supreme Court. Now, about spiritual evolution and ayahuasca, or ayahuasca generically, one of the things it tends to do, well, there are several things that happen on a frequent basis. One, and I think one of the most important spiritual insights, is that we are connected to something beyond our egoic self, that we don't end at the boundary of our skin. So that's one, and it's so important because, again, getting back to loneliness, that feeling of loneliness is, I end here, right here, my skin. I don't, and there's nobody there, right? So there's that. The second thing that ayahuasca does is it shows us things that we ordinarily might not see. It shows us things that we're doing that, are good to change. And that's a pretty regular feature, Or it gives us a perspective that's healing. For example, a good friend of mine, a woman who had a very challenging relationship with her mother, always, it started in infancy, but there was always this tension between them, and she felt that, she was the victim of her mother's inability to be with her in a nurturing way. And in one session, just one session, she saw that she has been playing a role in that relationship from very early on. That yes, it began with some of her mother's challenges, but she took on a role that she continued playing as an adult. Completely understandable as a child. But as an adult, she was doing the same thing, getting the same result, and blaming her mother. When she saw that, she was able to change that relationship. And it became different, it became a lot warmer than it ever had been, which was good because, her mother passed a few years later and it was a different relationship for years, a few years prior to that. So that's the second thing it does. And the third thing, very important, especially, you were right when you suggested that these topics were going to mesh. The third thing that I'm going to mention is that when you take ayahuasca with a group of people and you do it again and again over time, a network of friendship occurs because you're in this open space. And for example, our ceremonies, we call them sessions, begin at 8 p.m. and go to midnight. Afterwards, we hang out, chit chat, and eat until about 2 in the morning. And those connections are just deeper than our connections typically are because we're in an expanded and open state. So a community forms that's awesome antidote to loneliness.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on how to enhance those connections? When you brought that up, all I was thinking about was separateness. We always see ourselves as separate. As I'm moving on my own personal growth and spiritual path, what I recognize is that we're not separate. We're part of a part of a collective, and that there's more to it. Can you talk a little bit about that separateness and maybe moving past it?
Yeah, I think that's the essential task in spiritual development is moving beyond that separateness. We have to learn how to separate. We have to learn that a cat is different than a dog. A male is different than a female. Red is different than yellow. But when we're beginning to work spiritually, we begin to see and feel and realize that, what's really between us, if we can let it be there, is love. That's what's there. If we can really, open enough, feel that. And so it's not then so much, oh, look how different you are, than I am. But wow, we're here, we're together. The more we can open, and I talk about many disciplines in my book that help us to open because that's the work. Open, expand, increase the range of possibilities of our experience of self and therefore our relatedness. So yeah, and what supports you? Where did you recognize that you're not separate? Was it taking a substance to facilitate that? Was it in a group process? Was it in meditation? Continue with those ways that help you ground that realization in your life. It's the grounding of the realization in your life.
So, what you said was really important. And I think it's huge because you just gave 3 different examples that were very different. It's going to feel different for you and what's unique to you. So how you got there is different than how I got there, which may be different how the next person gets there. So it's understanding that there's not just one way.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm going to go back to that was, I think the reason I was divinely guided to do this podcast is to bring out so many different possibilities, because there are so many different possibilities
Yeah.
and ways. One of them, somewhere along the line, is going to resonate with you. The other thing that really hit me from the heart center is you're right. It is the love, and that can sound like just such a simple statement, but many times if you take a deep breath and you respond from your heart versus your head or your ego, it's going to feel different, and the possibilities shift to different possibilities. So the more I started having a true conscious awareness of coming from my heart in interactions or observations, it really shifted my perspective and honestly my outcomes and possibilities.
If we completed this conversation without what you just said being mentioned, I would be recalling this with a little bit of regret, because that's it. That's such a key. And again, it's not something that's supported very much in the culture. The culture is all about the head, the rational mind, right? And it's the heart where the wisdom is. It's the heart where we find the wisdom. And that simple practice, here's a to do. Just drop attention down. Learn to drop attention down to the heart and listen, sense, be there. Even if it's for 2 seconds, 35 times a day, you know?
Yeah,
Just keep coming back, coming back.
because it is all practice.
And yeah,
It is.
it's
The other thing, Don, that really struck me when, the loneliness epidemic, I agree with you. It's been out there for a long time. It's just that now it's been packaged and it's being put out there. But just in the
yeah.
survey, you're talking 142 different countries
Mm,
where you had people in different cultures, different lifestyles, maybe, all come up with the exact same issue and concerns and feelings, which supports again that we're not separate
mm-hmm,
and we're not separated, and that we do have a connection. And you said it earlier, it's focus on where we're connected, not what makes us different, right? Put the energy in, where's the connection?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I think it's important just to put that out there and realize that regardless what country you're listening to this from, it has nothing to do with borders and maps and all that other stuff that's out there. It literally has to do with us as humans, all being the same on some level.
I agree. And you know what else it tells me, Sandra, is that as a species, we're beginning to recognize something. That we're sharing this data that, oh, look, 142 countries all reporting, loneliness as an issue, similar percentages. Oh, are we waking up as a species? Are we realizing a little more that, hey, it's about connection? Yes, we all want to get food on the table. We all want to, do meaningful work. But if we get stuck there, then it becomes all about how much food I can get on the table, right?
Absolutely.
Rather than what comes next? What comes after that? And what do we do to prepare ourselves for what comes next?
I totally agree. The other thing that was interesting was not real really any differences between the male and the female of the species.
Mm-hmm.
It was all the same. Very eye-opening when you think about that. So that's just a little sidebar, like when filling out applications and stuff, a lot of times they ask for demographics, and a friend of mine and I were joking, it's like, you just want to put human. I'm a human.
Yeah.
Again, it's all that separateness. So I know that you do a lot of work. Can you talk a little bit about what it might look like if someone wanted to work with you, what you have to offer, and how do they get a hold of you? Or have you retired from all of that? I'm not really sure.
Okay. So again, I'm going to be 81 years old here.
Oh, I would not have guessed that.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you. In just 3 months, I'm 81. First of all, let me answer the last part of that. You can reach me on website www.pathsofconnection.com. Should I spell that, or will that?
You know what? I've got show notes that I put out, and then I list everything out on the website so they can go there and they can pull it all up.
Okay, great. So that's that. And you can get my book on Amazon, anywhere. I still see about 7, 8 people a week, but I'm not taking any new people at this time. My wife and I are teaching continuum workshops. There's a fluid movement exploration, but we just do, a Saturday and Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
Again, our age, but you can.
Well, you deserve to be enjoying other things. Not that you don't enjoy that. Like I said before, I've gone through your stuff and you have really made a mark in individuals' lives and honestly through society with the work that you have dedicated yourself with all these decades. So again, I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I wrote the book to help people get a sense of what's possible, because there's so many resources out there in 2024 that weren't there in 1960.
Oh, gosh, that's an understatement.
A lot that it is. But yet it's people still, by and large. How many people have heard about structural integration, Rolfing, Heller work? But these are things that can have a profound positive impact on our lives. That's how it is that, I'm 80 and I'm teaching a bunch of 40-year-olds how to move fluidly.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Any last words you want to leave for the listeners out there? You've got so many pearls of wisdom there.
When it's all said and done, when we get down to the most basic, fundamental force in the universe, it's love. It's love. I mean, I feel love talking to you, Sandra. I don't know where are you in Europe, England, or?
Actually, I'm in the States in Ohio.
Oh, okay. Still far away.
Different time zone, but yeah, because you're in Utah, I believe.
Yeah, Salt Lake City.
There you go.
But here we are. It just feels so good talking to you.
Absolutely. Don, I want to thank you. It was great having you on the show. And for all our listeners out there, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. And remember, embrace that wild soul. Thanks, Don.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wild Soul Gatherings Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. To learn more about our guests, please go to our website, wildsoulsgathering.com. We're very eager to hear from our listeners what you thought of the episode, topics you might like us to cover in the future, your thoughts on spirituality, questions you may have. Please feel free to send us an email at wildsoulsgathering@gmail.com. This is your host, Dr. Sandra Marie, sending each of you peace and love. Until we meet again, embrace your wild soul.